She always said she just wanted to be proud of herself one day. That was all. Not rich, not famous, just proud. But the man who was supposed to love her most in this world made sure she never got the chance. Lydia was 26 years old when her brother Aaron decided her future for her, not her father. Her father had been dead for 3 years by then, taken by a heart attack on a Tuesday morning, while he was still in his bathrobe drinking coffee. People at the funeral said he was a good man. Lydia stood there in her black dress and said nothing, because she had learned a long time ago that the truth and what people wanted to hear were rarely the same thing. Aaron was 34. He had their father's jaw, their father's walk, their father's way of filling a doorframe with his shoulders and making whoever was on the other side feel small. When their father died, Aaron inherited the house, the hardware business, and somewhere in his mind, the belief that he had inherited Lydia too. She had been accepted into a nursing program in Portland, full scholarship. She had applied in secret, filled out every form at the public library on her lunch breaks from the grocery store where she cashiered, and when the acceptance letter came, she held it in the parking lot and cried until her hands shook. She drove straight home, walked through the front door, and made the mistake of smiling. Aaron was sitting at the kitchen table when she told him. He didn't yell at first. That wasn't his way. He set down his fork, folded his hands, and looked at her the way he always did when he thought she was being foolish, like she was a child who had just said something embarrassing in public. "Portland," he said. "It's a full scholarship, Aaron. I wouldn't need. Who's going to help Mom?" Their mother, Elaine, was in the living room. Lydia could hear the television. She knew her mother had heard every word. She also knew her mother would not come into the kitchen. "Mom's fine," Lydia said. "She drives herself to church every Sunday. She gardens. She had a health scare last spring, a urinary tract infection." Aaron stood up from the table. He wasn't a violent man in the way people picture violent men. He never broke things, never raised his fist. He was violent in the way cold weather is violent. You don't see it coming. You just realize at some point that you've gone numb. "You're not going to Portland," he said. "You're going to stay here, keep your job, and stop putting ideas in your head that you can't afford." "Aaron, I'm not having this conversation." He walked past her into the hallway. She stood in the kitchen alone for a long moment, the acceptance letter still in her hand. Then she heard her mother change the channel. That was the first time Lydia understood that the person standing between her and her life wasn't just her brother. It was also the silence of everyone who watched and said nothing. She stayed. She told herself it was temporary. Told herself 6 more months, save a little more money, wait until things settled down. But 6 months became a year, and a year became the thing years do when you're not paying attention. It became her life. She met Dwayne at a cookout the following summer. He was a friend of a friend, easygoing in the way that men can be easygoing when they haven't been tested yet. He laughed at her jokes. He opened her car door. He called when he said he would call, and for a woman who had grown up watching her mother wait by the phone for a man who came home when he felt like it, that alone felt like something close to love. They were married 14 months later in the backyard of the house Aaron still considered his. Aaron walked her down the aisle. He smiled for the photos. Lydia wore her mother's earrings and a dress she'd found at a consignment shop and altered herself, and when Dwayne lifted her veil and looked at her, she genuinely thought, that she had found the door out. The first year was fine. The second year, the cracks started. Dwayne's mother, Verna, lived 40 minutes away and called 3 times a day. At first, Lydia thought this was sweet. A close family. A man who loved his mother. She would learn the difference, slowly, between a man who loves his mother and a man who has never stopped needing her to make his decisions. Verna had opinions about everything. About how Lydia cooked, about how she kept house. About the fact that they hadn't had a child yet, which Verna brought up at every Sunday dinner with the same casual cruelty of someone commenting on the weather. "Some women just aren't built for it," Verna said one evening, reaching across the table for the salt, not looking at Lydia when she said it. Dwayne stared at his plate. Lydia waited until they were in the car to say something. She waited because she had been taught her whole life to wait. To wait until the moment passed, to wait until things cooled down, to wait for the right time that never came. "Did you hear what your mother said to me tonight?" She didn't mean anything by it. "She's from a different generation, Lydia. That's just how she talks." That was the sentence that told her everything. That's just how she talks. The shrug, the look out the window, the way he turned up the radio just slightly, not enough to be rude, just enough to be done. She started noticing other things after that. The way he came home later and later without explanation. The way he checked his phone under the table at dinner. The way he stopped reaching for her hand. She told herself she was being paranoid. She went down the checklist of every woman who has ever tried to talk herself out of knowing something she already knew. She brought it up one evening in March, standing in the kitchen while she was making dinner. She kept her voice steady. She had rehearsed the words. He didn't yell either. He looked at her with something worse than anger. He looked at her with pity, like she was making a scene over nothing, like she was the problem she was describing. "You've always had anxiety," he said. "I think you should talk to someone." He sat back down on the couch and turned on the television, and Lydia stood at the stove and stirred something she could no longer taste, and felt the specific, horrible loneliness of being dismissed inside your own home. She called her friend Petra that night, sitting in her car in the driveway with the engine off because she didn't want Dwayne to hear. Petra had known Lydia since 7th grade. She was the kind of friend who didn't flinch. "You already know what's happening," Petra said. "You're just hoping I'll tell you you're wrong." "I am hoping that. I can't. I'm sorry." Lydia sat there in the dark for a long time after she hung up, watching the light in the living room window. She thought about the nursing program. She thought about Portland. She thought about the parking lot where she'd stood holding that letter with shaking hands, and how she hadn't been able to stop smiling, and how she hadn't smiled like that in a very long time. 2 weeks later, she found the texts. She hadn't gone looking. That's the part people don't believe, but it's true. She'd picked up his phone to check the time while her own was charging, and his screen lit up with a name she didn't recognize, and a message that made the floor feel unsteady beneath her feet. She set the phone down carefully. She went to the bathroom. She ran cold water over her wrist the way she used to do when she was a kid and couldn't calm down. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Then she went back to the kitchen and finished making dinner. Not because she was weak. She wants people to understand that part. Not because she didn't know what she'd seen. She finished making dinner because she needed one night to think, and because she had learned, from her father, from Aaron, from Dwayne, that when a woman reacts with emotion, she becomes the story, and she was not going to become the story. She waited 3 days. She made a list. She called Petra again. She called a number she found online for a legal aid clinic in town, and a woman named Ms. Hargrove answered, and Lydia sat in her car in the grocery store parking lot on her lunch break and explained her situation in a voice so calm that Ms. Hargrove asked twice if she was all right. "I'm fine," Lydia said. "I just need to know what my options are." On a Thursday evening in April, she sat Dwayne down at the kitchen table. She had already moved 2 boxes of her things to Petra's storage unit. She had already made copies of their financial documents. She had already done everything that needed to be done quietly, because she had grown up in houses where the quiet was the only space that belonged to her. She told him she knew. She told him she wanted a divorce. He went through every stage in about 4 minutes. Denial, anger, bargaining. The specific bargaining of a man who has never had to fight for anything and can't believe the strategy isn't working. He said she was overreacting. He said they could go to counseling. He said she was throwing everything away. "We don't have that much left to throw," she said. She slept at Petra's that night. She didn't cry. She lay in the dark in Petra's guest room and stared at the ceiling and felt something she hadn't felt in years, something so unfamiliar it took her a while to name it. Still. She felt still. Verna called her the next morning. Lydia let it go to voicemail. She never listened to it. She already knew what it would say, the way you know what a door sounds like in a house you've lived in long enough. The divorce took 7 months. Dwayne hired a lawyer. Verna told everyone in their social circle that Lydia had blindsided her son, that she'd always been unstable, that the family had done everything for that girl. Lydia heard it back through friends and church acquaintances, and once mortifyingly from Aaron, who called to say he'd heard there was trouble in the marriage, and to tell her he'd warned her. "You never warned me," she said. "I said he wasn't right for you." She didn't remember that. She remembered him skipping the wedding rehearsal, showing up late to the ceremony, giving a toast so short and flat it barely registered. She didn't remember him ever saying anything useful. "Don't call me about this again," she said, and hung up. That was the second time she understood something important. The people who claim they warned you are rarely the people who actually helped you. Aaron did not call again for 6 weeks. When he did, it was about their mother. Elaine had fallen getting out of the bathtub. She was fine. A bruised hip, nothing broken. But Aaron used it the way he always used information, as leverage, as a door he could swing open or shut, depending on what he needed from her. Lydia drove home. She stayed for a week, sleeping in her old room, making her mother soup, and helping her to the bathroom and sitting beside her on the couch watching game shows in the afternoon. Elaine held her hand sometimes. She never asked about the divorce directly. She asked instead if Lydia was eating enough, if she was sleeping, if she had people around her. "I have Petra," Lydia said. Her mother nodded. She looked at her hands. "I should have said something," she said. "When you told us about Portland." Lydia was quiet. "I know it doesn't help now. I want you to know I knew it wasn't right. What he said to you. Why didn't you say anything, Mom?" Elaine pressed her lips together. She had the look of a woman who had spent 60 years swallowing things. "I don't know," she said finally. "I really don't know." Lydia stayed for the rest of the week. She cooked and cleaned and drove her mother to a follow-up appointment, and when she left on Friday, she hugged Elaine for a long time in the doorway. She didn't say she forgave her. She wasn't sure yet. But she understood, in the particular way daughters eventually understand their mothers, not as heroes or villains, but as women who had their own cages, and who sometimes, out of fear or habit or self-preservation, forgot to open the door for someone else. She moved to a studio apartment in April. Second floor, one bedroom, a window in the kitchen that looked out onto a maple tree. The first morning she woke up there, she made coffee and sat by that window for an hour, and didn't speak to anyone and didn't owe anyone an explanation. And the silence felt completely different from every other silence she had ever lived inside. She enrolled in an LPN program at the community college in the fall. It wasn't Portland, it wasn't the full scholarship, but it was hers, obtained without permission, without anyone's sign-off, without having to wait for a pause in someone else's conversation. She started volunteering at a community health clinic on Saturdays. That was where she met Everett. He was a physical therapist, quiet in the way that some people are quiet, not because they had nothing to say, but because they had learned to listen first. He'd grown up in rural Mississippi, middle child of 7, and he had the patience of a man who had spent his entire childhood waiting his turn. He was not beautiful in the way movies mean it. He was steady in the way that actually matters. He asked her to coffee in November. She said yes, mostly because she was cold, and the clinic didn't have good heat. And then she sat across from him for 2 hours and realized she'd forgotten what it felt like to be in a conversation where she wasn't also monitoring the other person's mood. She told him about Portland on their third date, told him about the letter, about the library, about the parking lot. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You still want to go?" "What?" "Portland, the nursing program. You still want it?" No one had ever asked her that. She opened her mouth to say something reasonable and measured and found that she couldn't. "Yes," she said, "I think I still do, then figure out what it would take." "You have time," she cried on the drive home. Not from sadness exactly. More from the strangeness of being seen clearly and finding out it didn't hurt. She and Everett took things slowly. There were nights she pulled back, nights the old wariness crept in, the checking of his face for signs of weather she'd learned to read too early. He noticed, he didn't push. He said once, simply, "I'm not in a hurry. I just want to be somewhere you feel safe." She didn't tell him what that sentence did to her. She just filed it away in the place she kept the things she wanted to remember. Aaron found out about Everett the way Aaron found out most things, through their mother who had met him when Lydia brought him to Sunday dinner and who had called Aaron that evening because she could not help the habits of a lifetime. He called Lydia the next morning. "Who is this man?" he said. It wasn't a question. "That's not your business. You just got out of a marriage, Lydia. You don't need to be." "Aaron." She said it calmly, the way Miss Hargrove had taught her, without heat. "I'm going to say something and I need you to hear me. You don't make decisions for me. You haven't since I was 17 and you don't now. I'm going to keep living my life, and you can be part of it if you choose to be respectful, and if you can't do that, we don't have to talk." Silence on the other end of the line. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "Maybe, but it'll be mine." She hung up. She stood in her kitchen by the maple tree window for a long time after that, waiting to feel bad about it. She didn't. Dwayne remarried less than a year after the divorce was finalized. Lydia heard through Petra, who had heard through someone else. The woman he married was someone Lydia didn't know. She wished them nothing in particular. She had spent enough time and energy on Dwayne to last her a lifetime, and she had no interest in spending more. Verna, apparently, did not get along with the new wife either. Petra reported this with restrained delight. Lydia listened, said and went back to studying for her LPN boards. She passed on her first attempt. She called Petra from the parking lot of the testing center, standing in almost the exact same posture she'd stood in outside the library all those years ago, except this time she wasn't hiding. She was just a woman on a phone call in a parking lot on a Tuesday, and she had passed her boards, and the day was cold and clear and entirely her own. "You did it," Petra said. "I did it. Portland?" Lydia looked up at the sky, pale November blue, the kind that looks like it was rinsed clean. "I'm looking into bridge programs," she said. "There's one that could get me to an RN in 18 months. And Everett? He knows. He's the one who found the program." Petra made a sound of deep satisfaction. "Good. I like him. I know you do. I'm proud of you, Lydia." She stood there a moment after she hung up. She thought about the woman she'd been in that other parking lot, holding a letter with shaking hands, scared to want the thing she already wanted. She thought about all the years in between. The marriage, the silence, the kitchen she stood in stirring food she couldn't taste, the bathroom mirror, the boxes she packed quietly, the first morning in the studio apartment with the maple tree. She had spent a long time letting other people decide what was possible for her. She wasn't angry about it anymore. Anger had been useful for a while, it had gotten her out, But she didn't need to carry it anymore. She knew what she wanted. She knew how to go get it. She got in her car and drove home in the November light, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt exactly like herself.